In this video, we will discuss the company information page. To get to the page, click the gear icon, and then in the My Account column, click on Setup. This is a page that you won't use very often, but you may need to change a few settings from time to time. Let's look at the fields on this page. First is the company name. You'll notice that it is a required field indicated by the little red X next to the field. This field has two purposes. First, it is used by Synergy internally, especially in tech support. It lets us identify which Denari client we were working with. Second, it shows up on the home page when you log in. This may not be a huge benefit. However, if your organization has multiple Denari companies, it will serve as a reminder about which one you're working in. Suppress country. By default, Denari assumes that all clients are in the U.S. Therefore, when you print statements or reports that show the donor's name and address fields, Denari will not include the country since you don't need that field within the U.S. That doesn't work for our Canadian clients, however. When you're mailing to the U.S., you need to have the country printed, but don't need to have Canada printed. So for you Canadians, when you set up your name records, you will need to choose a country. You can then come here and select Canada in this field. Denari will then print the country you selected in the name record, like the U.S., but suppress or not print Canada. The gift import model field refers to the Excel gift import feature. There are three methods, but nearly everyone uses the general method because this model is the easiest and simplest. We'll discuss all three models in a separate training session covering gift import. In almost all cases, however, you can set this to general. Set the time zone where you are located. This can affect the time settings when credit cards and EFTs are processed. This doesn't come up very often, but when you're looking for a credit card transaction that Denari says processed at 11:59 p.m., when really it was 10:59 p.m. your time, it can make a difference. Fiscal year, month, and day, the next two fields refer to your fiscal year. There are some reports in Denari that allow you to choose fiscal year as the relative date range. That's usually easier than entering the beginning and ending dates. You will set that fiscal year here. The month field is the month that your fiscal year begins, and the day is the day that it begins. In this case, the fiscal year begins on July 1st. As you probably know, EFTs don't process immediately in the same way credit cards do. It can take several days for the transaction to work its way through the banking system before the money is actually withdrawn from your donor's account and deposited to yours. That's not a Denari thing, that's a banking industry thing. But Denari tries to compensate a little by sending the ongoing EFT donations to the processor a little early. For example, if your donor has designated the 20th as the day they want their EFT to run, Denari might send the info to the processor and create the gift batch in Denari on the 19th, one day ahead. In that way, the actual transaction may happen close to the day the donor intended. You can set the number of days ahead here that you want for your EFT transactions by setting a number in the Auto EFT Lead Days field. If you make it a 2, Denari will send the gifts 2 days ahead of the intended transaction date. If you put nothing here, Denari will send them 1 day ahead. And by the way, credit cards don't work like this since they transact immediately. Denari sends those on the day they are intended to transact. The missionary module day of the month is a little hard to explain if you haven't seen the missionary login page. First, this only applies to those using the missionary module. On the missionary screen, the missionary will see their total donations for a period of time by default when they log in. It calculates that for a month beginning on the day you set here. Some organizations, for example, run their payroll period from the 5th to the 4th of the next month, so you might want to enter a 5 here. When the missionary logs into their page, Denari will calculate donations starting on the 5th of each month. The missionary can then change dates temporarily anytime they want to see donations for a different date range, but this gets them started with a default. The Limit Missionary Name Editing checkbox field applies again to only those using the missionary module. Checking this box will prevent your missionaries from changing the name and address information through their login screen. Auto swap alternate addresses. This field refers to alternate addresses that you can set up for your name records when appropriate. As part of that setup, you can indicate which months of the year the alternate addresses will become the primary addresses. If you check this box, Denari will automatically swap the alternate and make it the primary, and then swap it back for the other months. Unchecking this box will of course not allow Denari to make that switch automatically. Alternate addresses is covered in a separate video. No mass email in contacts. When you use the mass email output from Name Segmenter, Denari can create a contact record of that email for each of the donors in the name segment output. This gives you a permanent record of that email to that donor. Some of Denari's clients prefer that and some do not. If you do a mailing to 5,000 names, you'll have 5,000 contact name records created, for example. Checking the box will not allow that to happen. Mass email all addresses. Using the mass email output from Name Segmenter will, by default, only send email to the primary email address. Checking this box will cause Denari to send an email to all the email addresses listed for each donor. So if you have 3 email addresses for a name record, that person will get 3 emails. Now, in the notification parameters section, we find first the credit card notification field. If you're using credit cards through Denari, Denari will send a notification about the credit card process. These notifications will go to the inbox of the person selected here. This person has to have a user record set up in Denari, and that's what you're really selecting, or one of the user records. The bad data letter. When a credit card transaction is declined, Denari can produce a bad data letter in PDF format for you if you wish to use it. You can simply drop it into the mail to the donor. It will come to your inbox along with the notification. It is basically a request for updated credit card information. And by default, it is an 8.5 by 11 page. The top of that page is a letter body that you can set up by clicking the plus sign at the top and then selecting the letters. Then select it here, and that's what Denari will use for the bad data letter. The manual EFT section, processing section, refers to an old method for processing EFTs. There are a couple of clients who are still using it, so these fields have been maintained. All new clients using a different method are using a different method, so these fields won't be used by you and you can simply ignore them. Duplicate checking can be a fuzzy process. When you add a new name to your data, Denari does a duplicate check to see if there are name records already in your data that might match the one you are adding. It then gives you the choice to continue to add new name records or not. By default, Denari checks the last name field, the first 10 digits of the street address, and the first 5 digits of the zip code. If it finds a match in all 3 of those, then it will flag that record as a potential duplicate. The problem is that there are many circumstances where matches in those fields result in a record that is not a duplicate. For example, you may have a mother and father record already in your data. Their son, who is living at home, decides to make a donation. He has the same last name, same street address, and the same zip code, but he's not a duplicate. You also have the problem where someone may enter the street name one way while someone else enters it a different way. No computer program will be able to know what you're thinking when you type that street differently than the one originally in the data. So Denari won't see that as a duplicate. There are many other circumstances that make it difficult for Denari or any computer program to identify with 100% certainty all the duplicates in your data. So the idea of the duplicate check is to limit them as much as possible. It won't be a perfect solution. But Denari does give you the ability to play with these settings if you'd like. You could, for example, check the email checkbox here, and then when you check any of the fields in this section, the defaults mentioned earlier are no longer used. So Denari will now use the criteria that you've selected here. So again, if you check that first field, Denari will look for any name record with matching email addresses, and that's all it's looking at. If you check the second field, it will combine those two together using an OR operator, and it will look for both conditions, either or. And if it finds a match in either one of those, it will flag that as a duplicate. The more you check here, the more Denari will look at. If it finds a match in any of these fields, it will indicate that you've indicated or checked, it will flag it as a potential duplicate. There are a couple fields here that need some explanation. The fields that have multiple criteria, like zip, street, last name, etc., means that Denari will be looking at all three of the fields and needs to find a match in all three to match that record. So if you chose that option and also checked the email option, then Denari would need to find a match in the street, zip, street, zip, and city field or the email field in order to find that record as a potential duplicate. In the second option down, you see the term fuzzy. This option is actually trying to interpret what you mean. If it sees the last name of SMITH in one record and SMIHT in the second record, it might see the similarity and flag that as a potential duplicate. This is not a perfect system, however, but it may help pick up a few more duplicates. The last option refers to soundex of name. This too is trying to find anything in the last name field that is remotely similar to an existing name record. Checking this box, however, usually results in a lot of flagged records. It is pretty liberal and tends to see just about anything as a duplicate. Again, you can play with these settings to see what works best for you. And finally, the Canadian Compliance Text field is a field used by Canadian organizations using Denari's credit card features. And that will be explained in more detail when we set up your credit card module if you're a Canadian organization. This completes this video on the company information page. If you have any questions, please contact tech support by clicking the help button in the upper right corner of Denari.